Hello everyone, my name is Nilanjan Chatterjee. We were discussing the Faraizi movement of 19th century India. It is a very important episode of the modern history of India. It is also a forgotten and unnoticed episode of the modern history of India. Let's talk about it. If you have missed our previous video, please go and watch our previous video. It is available on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel as well as like this video if you are actually enjoying it. So in the previous video we talked about the genesis and the meaning and the purpose of the Faraizi movement, how the notion of Faraizi got basically propagated by scholars like Haji Shariatullah in Bengal to mobilize the Muslim peasants of Bengal to bring back the purest form of Islam amongst the agrarian communities of Muslim Bengal and the peasant class of Bengal, and also to challenge the dominance of Hindu zamindari class of colonial Bengal. In that way, it also challenged the colonial economic system like permanent settlement with the help of leaders like Haji Shariatullah as well as Dudu. We have already talked about Haji Shariatullah in our previous video, who's happened to be the pioneer of the Faraizi movement. In this video, we'll be talking about Dudu and all his activities and what was the consequence of the Faraizi movement. I'm repeating, if you have missed our previous video, please go and watch our previous video. Otherwise, it will be a little difficult for you to understand the entire picture, the entire scenario. So let's start with today's discussion, that is Dudu, the organizer of the Faraizi movement. Dudu, who is also known as Muhsinuddin Ahmad, born in 1819 and died in 1862, was born in Madaripur, Faridpur. Madaripur is a small village in Faridpur, and spent 5 years in Makkah for religious education before being summoned home at 19 due to his father's illness. His succession in 1840 coincided with the most critical phase of the Faraizi movement, marked by heightened conflict with Hindu landlords, European indigo planters and conservative Muslim elements of Bengali rural community. Why indigo planters? I think you all know about the problems of indigo plantation. So the main problem with indigo cultivation is that indigo cultivation makes an entire land completely barren and unproductive. After the cultivation of indigo, that land can never be used for crop rotation or any kind of reharvestation. Okay? So the first point that I want to mention is the youthful vigor of Dudu, dynamic energy and charismatic leadership that inspired mass following, particularly the peasant class, because he was a very young fellow with a lot of knowledge about the purest form of Islam. He would teach, he would mobilize people with iron hands, he will handle the situation. The second point is diplomatic shrewdness, strategic navigation of colonial politics while maintaining movement integrity. That is also a very important part of the Faraizi movement. Why? Because it played a very tricky role against the colonizers. While Faraizi movement on one hand is fighting Hindu zamindars or within the factions of Islam, it is also directed against its main opponent, that is the colonizers, who have basically introduced all these oppressive measurements on the rural population, the peasant class, the Muslim peasants of Bengal. Now, the third point is organizational genius. Transformed scattered religious campaigns into structured, mass-based organization. That is also a very important point of the Faraizi movement. And now comes the organizational skills of Dudu. Particularly, we'll talk about the Khilafat system. The importance of Khilafat system is that it talks about 3 layers of Khilafat. The first is Gaon Khilafat. Since Dudu actually intended to mobilize the rural population. It was very important to create one small unit of people based on villages. Okay, that is why he created Gaon Khilafat or Gaon Khalifa. First, Gaon Khalifa headed each Faraizi settlement of 300 to 500 families, maintained discipline, supervised religious education, and mediated disputes at the village level. I've already discussed in my previous video how the Faraizis went beyond the teachings and the preachings of the local Maulavis, and they enabled the Muslim communities of rural Bengal to read Quran, to read Islamic texts on their own, because with the help of education, proper education. Without being educated, you don't have to simply go to a Maulavi to get access to Quran. You get educated and understand and interpret Quran on your own. That was the main intention of the Faraizi movement. And that is when you can truly realize the purest form of Islam. And you can purify yourself, your beliefs, your practices, your attitude, your customs, your behavior, everything. So, second point is superintendent Khalifa. Okay, supervised several villages grouped into a gird, that is a circle, presided over appellate councils and ensured adherence to Faraizi principles. And at the top, there is Uparastha Khalifa. In Bangla, we call it Uparastha Khalifa. Senior advisors residing at Bahadurpur headquarters assisted Dudu in policy decisions and discussions as well as strategic planning. So these were the three scales originated during the Faraizi movement. Now, a state within a state. On one hand, we see that the entire India is dominated by the Britishers in 19th century, and the zamindars are basically propagating the British rules in the form of economic exploitation. Now, within that state format, Dudu is initiating or introducing his own state, a state within a state. This intricate administrative network extended Dudumia's symbolic authority all across Bengal, creating a parallel governance structure that administered justice, education, moral conduct within the Faraizi community. We don't listen to the Britishers. We have our own customs. We have our own sense of justice, law, and order. Okay, so the system functioned with remarkable efficiency, as noted by historians like James Wise. Cases of violence within Faraizi areas rarely reached British courts. Justice was dispensed internally with swiftness and moral legitimacy. Why it happened and how it happened? Because we are seeing a purification, a purified form of political legitimacy. Okay, it is not about just ousting the zamindars or Britishers. It is also about situating yourself in a pure form of governance. Okay, in a purely religious. Pure, the word pure is very important. Setup. Okay. Dudu enforced a verbal injunction prohibiting reference of disputes to government courts, effectively establishing autonomous governance in eastern Bengal. So within a span of time, Dudu functionally became the sovereign ruler of most parts of eastern Bengal. Okay, because he became the leader of the common people, the peasant class, the working class. Okay, so next point is the dual organization structure. One is the Siyasati branch and the other one is the Dini branch. I've already told you about the two wings of the Faraizi movement. On one hand, the socio-religious branch, on the other hand, the political and economic branch. The first is the Siyasati branch, that is the political wing, composed of trained lathials. Lathials are basically clubmen carrying spears and lathis, who defended Faraizi villages against landlord and planter violence. Okay, this is very important. These are political reforms. This armed wing dismantled the coercive apparatus of the zamindars and indigo planters. I've already discussed the cons of indigo plantation. I think many of you already know it. And then the socio-religious wing, that is the Dini branch. Deen means religion or belief rather. Responsible for moral guidance, education and ritual observance, maintain the spiritual and ethical, most importantly. It is also talking about ethical purity. Ethical purity. foundations of the movement through teaching and community leadership. Both branches were eventually merged into a unified Khilafat system, which became a prototype of grassroots political mobilization under religious leadership. Now we have come to the most important facet of the Faraizi movement. The land belongs to the tiller. Dudu Miya's most enduring contribution lay in his agrarian doctrine. After all, we have to remember he was a peasant leader, okay, of equality and proprietorship of labor. Okay, there will be no zamindari class. The rural communities, the peasant communities will be the ultimate authority over the lands that they are cultivating. Okay, so he rejected the legal fiction of landlord ownership, declaring that cultivators had held rightful claim to the land they worked. Okay, his stance attracted peasants across religious boundaries. Most important feature of Faraizi movement over the period of time, many of the oppressed Hindus also joined the Faraizi movement, forgetting about their religious affiliation. Why? Because it spoke about economic and political security of the downtrodden villagers and peasants. Okay, now let's come to our next slide, that is the strategic prudence, avoiding confrontation. Although it was mainly directed against the colonial regime, despite the movement's radical potential, Dudu Miya carefully avoided direct confrontation with the East India Company. Why? Because there was another movement that was going on in India back then in 19th century, that is the Wahhabi movement led by Titu Mir, and it led to a completely bloody massacre. Okay, that kind of frightened the Faraizis. The Wahhabis and how the condition of the Wahhabis and how they kind of gave in to, they had to kind of give in to the British rule. That was quite disheartening for all the peasant population. So they were a little balanced and cautious. Okay, I have already mentioned about Titu Mir. In the next video, we'll be talking about the Wahhabi and the Tariqa-e-Muhammadiyya movement. Stay tuned. He maintained cordial relation with the British officers, even engaging in hunting expeditions to sustain goodwill. Okay, this strategic loyalty ensured the movement's survival, where open insurgency would have meant annihilation. Okay, so which means Dudu Miya had a very diplomatic relation with the Britishers. Okay, on one hand, he was challenging the zamindari system. On the other hand, he was trying to make a good relation with the Britishers. Okay, so the next point is the post-1857 consequences. Post-1857 revolt, colonial suspicion fell upon all indigenous mobilization. Dudu Miya was arrested. Even after making a good relation term, he was arrested and imprisoned in Alipur Jail, Calcutta, until his release in 1861. He died the following year in Dhaka, leaving behind an organization that had outlived him. It has a long history even after the death of Dudu Miya, a rare phenomenon amongst religious reform movements of that time. Now we have come to one of the final slides of today's video. Dudu Miya was succeeded by Syeduddin Ahmad, whose name is Naya Miya. Dudu Miya's son assumed the leadership in 1862. His period witnessed a relative decline in militant activism and growing accommodation with colonial state, because they understood the importance of the assistance of the colonizers. The British bestowed upon him the title Khan Bahadur. That is why Naya Miya got the status of Khan Bahadur. His tenure marked increasing sectarian tensions within the, this is also very important, within the Taiwanese, and shift from agrarian mobilization to intra-religious debate. Okay, debate within the Muslim community because of their the Faraizi clashes with the Taiwanese. Okay, next is Rashiduddin Ahmad, particularly I've already mentioned from 1884 to 1947 and afterwards. Naya Miya's son Rashiduddin Ahmad continued cooperation initially, but the annulment of the 1905 partition of Bengal profoundly altered his stance. Disillusioned with British duplicity, he joined the Khilafat non-cooperation movement of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, aligning the Faraizi cause with pan-Islamic and nationalist sentiments. Okay, and that is how Faraizi movement got connected to the freedom movement of India and Pakistan. And of course, Pakistan and the Darul Islam. Following the creation of Pakistan in 1947, Badshah Miyan made a momentous theological declaration. He proclaimed Pakistan as Darul Islam. Okay, that is the land of Islam. So the main complaint of the Faraizis was that India has become, or the Indian subcontinent has become the Darul Harb because of the impurities. Now they, after the creation of the nation state of Pakistan, they declared it as Darul Islam, thereby permitting the resumption of Friday and Eid congregations, which had been suspended for over a century under the Darul Harb doctrine. Okay, so he convened a Faraizi conference at Narayanganj, affirming the new state as the legitimate domain of Islam. This marked the culmination of the movement's evolution from resistance to accommodation, from opposition to integration. So we have come to the final half of our discussion, the final slide of today's discussion, that is the doctrinal distinctiveness. First of all, on one hand, although Faraizi movement challenged the zamindari system and the colonial mode of production, it also propagated Hanafi orthopractic Islamic order. Okay, it is a particular jurisprudence within Islam, and also, on the other hand, it wanted to purify Islam by reforming certain tendencies and traditions. Also, political subversion. It was a political reform, not just a socio-religious reform directed against the colonizers and the Hindu zamindars, and also anti-syncretism. Okay, why? Because Faraizi movement identified the local syncretic traditions of India, where the Hindus and Muslims are getting mixed, a danger to the purification of Islamic society. That is why he spoke against syncretism. And finally, elite challenge, opposition to traditional Muslim aristocracy and Sufi orders. Okay, traditional Muslim aristocracy and Sufi orders challenged the role of the Faraizi movement because of its strict adherence to the Hanafi orthodoxy. That is it for today. We'll be talking about another very important and forgotten movement and rebellion, you can call it, of 19th century India, and we'll talk about the pertinence, we'll talk about the relevance of these movements in terms of the modern history of India. Thank you very much. We'll see you in the next one. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel. Vote this up so that YouTube knows you are enjoying what you're watching. Thank you very much. Peace out.